Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 247 DIY. As you can see, I've got my 2012 Forester back up here on the lift. And if you enjoy the idea of maintaining a higher mileage vehicle in a state in the Rust Belt area here in the US, well then this video is for you. Specifically in the event that, like me, you end up with rusty brake lines that end up failing and causing you to lose brakes. So stay tuned while we go ahead and get this sorted out and fixed. So as I alluded to in the intro, the other day I was coming home from dinner, got to the very first stoplight after leaving the parking area, and had brakes initially for a second, and then my foot just slowly went to the floor, and after that I really had no brakes. Luckily, this being a manual transmission, I was able to use a combination of downshifting, pumping the brakes, and using the e-brake to limp the car home. Saw some brake fluid dripping when I pulled it in the garage, wanted to know what was going on, so immediately brought it down here to the barn, got it on the lift. There's normally a plastic under tray right here, removed the under tray, and lo and behold, you can see there is this junction where the driver and passenger side lines come down out of the body where they run under the car along the passenger side. They go into this junction block. The top line there goes over to your rear passenger side caliper, and the bottom line goes up over the gas tank and over here to the driver's side caliper. So this particular setup, this junction point here that Subaru has used for quite a while now in a lot of their models, has been a point of failure. I know initially there was a recall for, I think it was like 05 to 09 Legacies and some Outbacks in that area. Since then, I do believe that the warranty was extended to this generation Forester as well as some Imprezas and I'm sure other models of vehicle. I could probably go ahead and call a dealership and see what it would be like as far as if the warranty is still valid and everything like that. The only problem with that is I don't have a local Subaru dealership. It's about a 45-minute drive on the highway from me. And being that I can't drive it in this condition, at least not safely, that distance, I'd have to get it towed. I do have AAA, so it probably wouldn't cost me anything. I could have it towed there. But then I would need a loaner in the meantime. And anytime in the past when this vehicle was newer and I had the extended warranty, it was still under warranty, I did have the dealership out there do a lot of the work while it was under warranty. But every time I needed a loaner for something, it was always like a week out, 2 weeks out in order to get a loaner, and I need this done now. So I didn't have to tackle this right away. It's been sitting for a couple of days, but I do need to get this ready to go to get back to work here at the end of the week. And I really just don't have the time to mess around with the dealership, whether they have loaners available, and getting the vehicle out there when I have a lift, a full shop essentially, and all the tools and supplies that I can need to just go ahead and take care of this myself and not worry about the headache. And so when this problem initially popped up, I jumped on Facebook. I do have a Subaru group that I joined. There's lots of knowledgeable people in there and you can bounce ideas off them. Initially upon seeing this, I guess you could say I was a little bit overwhelmed with all four of these lines are gonna need repairing. And got a lot of really good advice since this is such a common problem as far as other people fixing it themselves. So here's the game plan for today. These grayish color lines you see come down here, come down from inside of the vehicle just under the back seat. So that's where we're going to start today. We're actually going to remove the lower portion of the back seat. We're going to cut the lines up in there and we're going to add some unions. That way those unions are up in there where there's nice, good, not corroded line to use, and it'll keep those unions from being down here where they can corrode. And then we're actually going to eliminate this junction block, and I am going to run all new lines here in the rear. After these portions right here, which it's this top one right here, which actually rusted out and burst, the lines aren't too bad. The one going over here to the passenger side, just where it goes up over the gas tank, there is some rust on that. So it really doesn't make sense to try to splice into these lines, not to mention I don't think there's really enough room here to get a flaring tool up in there anyway. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna bypass this and we're just gonna run all new hard line back to the calipers. The part where you have to get a little bit inventive, the lower line here that actually routes up over the gas tank and then over to that caliper, like I just said, it goes up over the gas tank. If you wanted to follow that same routing, you'd really have to pull the gas tank down, which would mean dropping your rear end and then disconnecting the drive shaft and pulling axles and a whole bunch of work that I don't want to do. So what it seems to be very, very common, I got lots and lots of people saying that this is what they did. Instead of running this second line down here, they just run it up underneath the vehicle underneath the passenger seat, and then we'll get this splash under tray down out of there, and then basically where these lines come down should be where the fuel lines come down, and you can run it through what should be, I've never messed around really underneath here on this particular Forester, but I know it's that way on a GD Impreza and lots of other Subarus. There should be like a rubber grommet there where the fuel lines come down through. We should be able to find room there to then bring it down through and run the new line over here to this caliper. So what we're gonna do first, I gotta get the splash guard down. I won't film that because that's simple enough, and I think I gotta move this lifting point a little bit in order to be able to get this out. But you've got two 12mm nuts. You got one right here, one right here, one up in there, one up in there, and then one up in here. I think that's all of them. Yeah, that's all of them. But they are really rusty, so it's gonna take me, sorry about the shake there on the camera, but they are really rusty. The other side I needed easy outs because the heads were so corroded. So I'm just gonna take a minute. We're gonna get this splash tray down, and then I'll meet you inside the car once we have this down, and we'll remove the back seat and take a look at where we're gonna be adding those unions. So with that under tray now removed underneath, I've lowered the vehicle down, and if I remember right, the only thing you need to do to get this lower seat bottom off is just give it a good yank, and I'm pretty sure that's how these come out. All right, guys, so here we are on the passenger side of the vehicle again, and these are our two brake lines coming down through where they go down and where they transition into more of that gray color line that we had shown from underneath. Now, I think what I'm going to do, just so that nowhere along the line can I get things confused, we're going to do one line at a time because you don't want to mix up your driver and passenger side. If you do, that's really going to confuse your ABS system if you cross these lines when we route our new lines. But we are going to be cutting somewhere probably about right in here, or maybe even right here, because there's a nice straight section here to put our new fitting and union on. Yeah, I think that's probably actually where we're going to do it, is probably cut it right here. So let's go about figuring that out and getting that done. All right, and I did just want to mention, I did remove this small trim piece, this one right here. It removes the same way the seat back does. You just yank up on it. And then this bit of carpet here, I just tucked up out of the way so we've got room to work. In a future video, I know I kind of alluded to it, this carpet's all going to get replaced anyway. You can see I had a little accident over there where I had to cut some of the carpet out. That's down the road. Some things I got to do in the meantime before we're ready to replace the interior on this, but that's another video. So I did go ahead and I just kind of double and triple checked, but this one right here is going to be the one we are going to be routing down through here to go to the passenger side. I started wiggling this up and down just to verify which one was wiggling underneath. I lifted it up and verified that. And it's a good thing we're getting to this project because not only did all four fittings at that junction block start to leak pretty profusely, there's also a couple of spots on both of these hard lines as they kind of wrap up towards the side of the fuel tank that also started leaking. There's some rusted spots there. So it's a good thing that all these lines going to the back here are going to be getting replaced. So because there was so much corrosion, very, very easily, I just took a pair of cutters underneath and I cut that bottom left fitting right away so we have room to pull this up and we'll have room to cut this line and get working on sorting everything out up here. All right, guys, so I'm going to do my best to get some good camera angles and try to show you everything that I'm doing from good angles, but it's just kind of hard here in the back seat. It's just kind of a dark, cramped area, but we're going to go ahead and start with getting this line cut, and we'll get a fitting on this side. I'll show you the whole kit I went with in a minute. It's just the more expensive kit that Harbor Freight offers. This is the cutter that comes with the kit, and like I said, I think right here probably going to be the best spot. I could do it down here. It'd leave me a little bit more room. I don't know. At least for now, I'm going to start here. You can always cut more off if we don't have enough room here versus you can't really add more back on. So I'm going to start with the first cut right here. Yeah, and you can see that this didn't even go all the way down to the junction block. This is where they stopped that rubber coating that they put on their steel lines, and that was all corroded out right there, and that just, as I was trying to pull that short section out where I cut it from the junction block, snapped right off right there. So it's a good thing we're getting these changed out. Now we need to go ahead and remove this rubber coating from the outside. I'm going to go ahead and use our same cutter here just to score that coating. You want to remember not to go too deep because you don't want to actually get in there and start cutting into the steel line. It's not very thick, and you really don't need to go all the way through. It's just going to give you a nice clean cut for when we try to remove this rubber coating here. And we're gonna go ahead and just deburr with this tool that comes in the kit the inside of the pipe opening. Real lightly, you don't have to go crazy. We're just trying to take the lip off that edge a little bit. All right, so the first thing you wanna do, very important, because you're gonna hate yourself if you forget, is get your fitting on there first. We actually might have to remove some more of that coating. Yeah, in order to get our tool on there. So we're gonna have to remove some more coating. And then we're gonna place the flaring bar. If you can see there's a little step on that. You're just gonna lay that flat against your flaring bar, and you're gonna make sure that the end of the line that you're flaring sticks out that same amount and is flush with that step. And then as per the instructions, we're gonna tighten down the wing nut closest to the line first, and just try to get it to tighten down nice and even. And then we're gonna place the flaring insert right in the end of your brake line. Take your flaring tool, get it on there, rotate it so that it locks onto the sides of the flaring bar, and then center the tip. It can be a little finicky, but you get that tip in there. Once that's in there, you're just going to crank it down until the flaring adapter sits flush against the flaring bar. Back it off. Remove the little adapter. And then do the same thing after you've removed that flaring adapter, pressing the end of the line into the forming hole on the flaring bar. And that should give you a nice, clean 45-degree double flare, also known as an inverted flare. It's always helpful just to give it a little inspection, make sure that there's no burrs or anything in there. But everything's looking good right there. Just gonna clean off some of the coating on the steel line collected there. We wanna make sure we've got a nice clean join. All right, and I will go ahead and link all of the tools and the supplies that I use for this project in the description down below. But if you're wondering, these fittings that I'm using are the OE spec fittings. These are M10 by 1.0 inverted flare, or also called a double flare or a double 45. And so this is the union that we're gonna be going with. Just go ahead and put that on there right now. I'm not gonna really tighten anything down. I'm just gonna throw it on there. So now I think I'm gonna go ahead and lift the car back up in the air, and we're gonna take a look at things in the wheel well back here and how we're gonna route this new line. All right, and so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the hard line. This is the one that we've already clipped down at that junction. I did go ahead and clip the other side, the rearward side of it, to loosen up this line. I'm going to undo the fitting here, and it wouldn't be the end of the world to say clip the line down in here and just leave the old line in place, but I can kind of see most of this line, and I'd like to get the entire old line out of there if I can. If I can't, like I said, we'll just cut it and leave the majority of it in place. And as I said, these are 10 millimeter by 1.0 fittings. Very handy to have line wrenches on hand because if you use just a standard open box wrench, a lot of times you round these off. It's not the end of the world. I've gotten by before on really stubborn ones. You can get a pair of vice grips on there and break them free, but we don't really care if we mangle this because we're going to be replacing it anyway. And yeah, so it was a good thing. Again, like I said, they're replacing all this line. There's this portion here that ran up near the gas tank, and that snapped right off too, because you can see it's real rusty right there where it goes past the gas tank. So that would have just been a nightmare down the road if we had tried to splice into this line anyway. All right, and so the next thing was to come down here and kind of try to decide where I want my routing to go. I'm going to do similar to the OEM routing. I'm just not going to go up as far up under the lip of the fuel tank there. I do think I'm going to come down. You can see I came in here and I took the brass brake line junction that Subaru uses off of there. I ended up snapping that bolt, and then you can see the driver's side lines, they just snapped off as I was working on this. But what I think I may do is drill a hole for a self-tapping screw and then use a P-clip to hold that line securely right there after it comes down onto the body. So you can see, probably hard to see, you can kind of see the empty spot in that grommet. I do know that we need to have a 90-degree, obviously, bend right there. So what I'm going to do is I picked up this nickel copper, or copper nickel, I don't know if it makes a difference. Brake line, 3/16 from AutoZone, 25 foot of it. No, I don't need 25 foot of it, but like I said, I've got a little bit of my own shop here going on, so it won't hurt to have some on hand. But we're gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna start bending this. A lot of it's probably gonna end up off camera, at least in terms of bending it, but I'll be sure to check back with you as I get this routing through. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a 90 on it with enough material to go up in there, and I'll leave more than I need to cut off the excess for the other 90 when we get in the body to meet up with that union. But yeah, that's the game plan for right now. All right, so I've gone ahead and I positioned that down there where I wanted it. And I've had this tubing bender for years. A long time ago on an 08 Forester, I had to do a small repair on a rear brake line. That's why I have this. I don't even know what brand it is, but it's helpful to have so you can just put some nice looking bends in. I went a little bit past 90 here, and that should drop us down where we want to be underneath. And so all we got to do is get our fitting on there, measure this out, cut it where we want it, and flare it like the other side so we can keep moving on. So I thought I could get away with that fitting on there after we had bent it. It's just not going to work. The fitting won't slide down. These fittings that I had available local to me are a bit longer than fittings I've used in the past. And so they don't really like to slide on very much of a bend at all. Usually if there's a slight gradual bend, you can get them to work with you a little bit, but this was not going to go around any type of bend or curve at all. All right, so it's important when you do go ahead and bend these by hand, just don't go to the extreme. You don't want to kink it. Just make sure you're gentle, slow bends on it so that you don't kink that line, because then you won't have any hydraulic flow with your brake fluid. So what I'm going to do now, even though we are going to be cutting this line here that goes to the driver's side, is I do want this to kind of sit just like this, so you can see it wants to come out this way. I'm just going to zip tie it to the other line for right now, so when we go underneath, I know exactly how much slack is and where I want my line to locate. So that'll hold it in place, and when I go underneath, I don't have to worry about whether or not I'm in the right location or not. All right, and so like I said, where that came down from the grommet up underneath there, I just drilled a little hole for a self-tapper and a P-clip to hold that brake line in there, where it routes over to where we're going to be straightening that out and getting it over to the passenger side wheel well. All right, and so instead of boring you guys with a whole bunch of footage of me struggling, we've gone ahead and finished this side up. This is where we left off last time. You can see it routes up along the lip of the fuel tank. That would be just below where the factory one was. The factory one was up above it. And then we route through right there, basically the same way the factory line came through. We route there. This 90 right here rests right up against the body. I didn't know if that was going to be like an abrasion issue over time, so I did add just a little bit of padding right there for that to rest. And then we did the same sort of style, OE style loop right there into our new fitting. And I popped out the factory clip for the factory line, since it's a little bit larger steel line with that coating on it that the factory uses. This line wouldn't clip into that. I just popped it out and used one of my push-in style zip ties to secure that where the factory spot was. This is tightened down now, so this will be ready to go. As I said, we've left this one hand tight for now, but this side is essentially finished up, so now we can go ahead and move on to the driver's side. And we're back in the back seat again, and we'll go ahead and start working on this driver's side. Like I said, we're not going to route this underneath like the factory routing, for a couple reasons. Like I said, I don't want to have to drop the fuel tank. That would be a nightmare. And the other thing too is if I don't route it up over the fuel tank, it does leave it exposed in some of the areas that I saw where you could run it. And like I said, from all the advice that I got on the Facebook group I'm part of, many people run it through the interior underneath the back seat. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm actually going to cut this line a little bit back here, since we're traveling in that direction anyway. We'll cut this whole bit of line right out of here. All right, so it's actually the next day. Not that this project necessarily needs 2 days, but if you add in the time it takes to film, and then I ran into a few frustrations and some things that took up some of my time yesterday, it was just a better idea to just let this sit overnight and just finish everything back up out here the next day. Everything is finished up right now as far as the lines are concerned. Obviously, we need to put the rear seat back in and the panels up underneath the rear end and get the wheels back here on the rear end. I'll get into what the frustration was yesterday here in a minute, but let me get you caught up from where we left off last time. We had finished up the passenger side brake line and we were working on getting the driver's side done. And so yeah, so this was the passenger side union that we put in yesterday, and I did get a little ahead of myself and started getting this trim back together here, but you remember where we left off. This is the union for the driver's side line, and like I said, we are running that under the rear seat over there to the passenger side. I did decide, I ran it through, there's kind of a nice recessed area all the way through the back, but just because I didn't want this sort of metal on metal potentially causing any wear through on the brake line here, I have this self-adhesive felt strip I bought for a project not too long ago, and I had a bunch left over. So anywhere where this brake line was going to be touching the actual metal of the body here, I just stuck some of that down, so then when the foam of the seat cushion comes down and kind of presses down, everything's sandwiched by a soft surface rather than right up against the metal. And then that goes right up over there to the driver's side. And then over here on the driver's side, we come through, and then I found a good spot right here to drill a hole and bring the brake line down through. Now you want to be careful because pretty much all right through here is your gas tank, and it sits just underneath this metal here. It's not far away, so you want to be careful where you drill. Ideally, I would have liked to have come somewhere down in here, but I wasn't 100% sure exactly where that would come out. I knew exactly where running it through here was going to come out. And then I guess a positive of me saving everything and not throwing anything out, I just have these random grommets. I don't know what they came from, but it worked pretty good. I drilled it out to similar size there, punched it in the hole, and now I have a nice rubber pass-through for this brake line, and it won't get rubbed where we drilled through the body metal there. And then that basically brings us right down. You can see it come down right there. It's essentially right where it comes down, just above the lip of the gas tank. Comes underneath, basically follows exactly where the factory routing was, and loops up and over into the soft line. It did want to touch the body a little bit here, so I actually took a little piece of vacuum hose just to keep this from staying pressed against the metal of the body. And I think that looks a lot better using the vacuum hose than the way I did it on the passenger side. So off camera I'll go over, and I think I'm going to repeat it this way on the passenger side. And then you can see it didn't quite line up exactly with the factory clip that I replaced with the zip tie holder, but that's enough to hold it in there. Everything's nice and secure even without it anyway, but I figured since there was a holder anyway, we'd go ahead and use it. So I'm going to go ahead and get these wheels thrown back on and the rear seat back in, and I'll meet you guys underneath. And then with those under trays back up under the underside, it's like it never even happened. It's a good thing that I always keep any hardware off any project, any old hardware, as long as it's not super rusted or corroded, because every single one of these bolts had to be replaced, bolts and nuts. These ones are actually lock nuts for strut tops. They don't really need a lock nut, but since these were the least rustiest nuts that I had to throw on there, I used them anyway, and a little added security, I guess. Funny enough, I didn't notice until after I put these back up, there is a little access window here that looks right up at those, or where that junction block was. And this is definitely way too small to say that this would be access for working on those brake lines or anything. So it's very clear that Subaru knew that there was potential for a problem there and left this little window so you could pop it open and monitor the corrosion going on up there with those brake lines. Like I said, this initial design had a recall on it back in like 05 to 09 Legacies, and it still kind of blows my mind that Subaru didn't change the design down the road, because this is a 2012 Forester. You think they would have changed that to a different design, because there's plenty and plenty of people out there that are dealing with this problem right now. But anyway, that's done. Vehicle's back on the road, and that's a good feeling to know that this thing's just going to keep rolling for many more miles. All right, so I did mention earlier in the video that I would just show the kit that I went ahead and used. Like I said, this is the more expensive one from Harbor Freight. This one was about $67. The cheaper one, I believe, if I remember right, when I went to go get this one, was about $14. But it's a really nice kit. It's got everything that you could really ever need to do inverted flares as well as bubble flares. And then it even comes with some pretty basic but useful instructions on how to flare your line. And as I said, I just had this laying around. It's not necessary for this. The nickel copper line is soft enough to bend by hand, but if you want some tighter radius bends that look really nice, a little tubing bender like this can come in handy. And so that's going to go ahead and wrap this video up. As I alluded to a little bit earlier, the only headache I had with this project was after I had the lines ran and I went to go ahead and bleed the brakes. I felt like I wasn't getting a proper brake feel, but really that was actually just ended up being me. After I brought this down in the shop, after I lost the brakes, I had been driving my wife's terrain. We had gone numerous places throughout the weekend, driving her terrain, which actually has almost no travel to it, a very, very stiff brake pedal. And you compare that to a Subaru, which in my experience, now I will say with a little asterisk on that, I've only ever driven used Subarus and higher mileage Subarus, but in my experience, Subarus do tend to have a bit of a softer brake pedal. At least in the beginning, there's a decent amount of travel. So after I had bled the brakes and then turned the vehicle on and with the booster kicking in, it did feel a little spongy, but really that was just in comparison to the brake feel that I had gotten used to driving my wife's vehicle. In the end, it was perfectly fine. There was no issues with bleeding the brakes. I will mention that even though the disconnect was there on the rear lines, enough fluid did leak out to, and it doesn't really make sense to me, but all I can say is it did happen. Enough of it leaked out where it made its way up to the ABS unit, and I did get a little bit of air in one of the front lines, specifically the front passenger side, so I did have to bleed all 4 tires. It wasn't all the way into the ABS unit where the ABS unit needed to be calibrated, because that can be kind of a nightmare if you get air inside that unit. As those lines emptied, it did somehow end up introducing air, like I said, specifically in that front passenger side. So if you're doing this, just remember to bleed all 4 calipers after you're done with the project. But then after I took it out and just took a test drive, I realized that the brake feel was completely normal and it was stopping the same exact way it had been stopping prior to doing the repair. And so with all that, that's one more repair done, keeping my 2012 Forester here, hopefully on the road for many more miles to come. So if you guys like the video, be sure to hit that like button. Feel free to leave a comment below, and if you're not subscribed already, please consider subscribing. Thanks.